She demanded half of everything I owned in court today, but she had no idea I'd been 3 steps ahead for 5 years. The courtroom was sterile and cold, but the tension radiating from my wife's legal team was anything but. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent light, her designer suit chosen specifically for this moment. She looked confident, victorious even, surrounded by her 3 attorneys who had spent months building what they believed was an airtight case. "Your Honor," her lead counsel was saying, "Mrs. Harrison is entitled to half of all marital assets, including the substantial inheritance Mr. Harrison received during their marriage. She contributed equally to this partnership and deserves her fair share." I watched Victoria nod solemnly, playing the role of the wronged wife perfectly. The same woman who, just 6 months ago, had thrown a crystal vase at my head when I suggested we needed to discuss our relationship. Judge Matthews shuffled through the papers before him. "Mr. Harrison, how do you respond to these claims?" I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. My attorney, David Chen, remained seated with an expression that could have been carved from stone. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal, "I have a document that I believe will clarify this matter considerably." Victoria's confident smile faltered slightly. Her lawyers exchanged glances. "What document?" Judge Matthews asked. I nodded to David, who opened his briefcase and withdrew a leather portfolio. "A prenuptial agreement, Your Honor, signed by both parties before the marriage." The color drained from Victoria's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her head attorney, the shark she'd hired at $2,000 an hour, leaned forward with sudden urgency. "Your Honor, we were never informed of any prenuptial agreement." "This is highly irregular." "Irregular," I interrupted, "but perfectly legal and perfectly valid." The document was passed to the judge. As he read, the silence in the courtroom became oppressive. Victoria's breathing grew shallow and rapid. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled against the table. "This appears to be in order," Judge Matthews said finally. "Mrs. Harrison, did you sign this document?" Victoria's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. I thought it was just paperwork." That's when I allowed myself to smile. After 5 years of marriage, 5 years of watching her slowly reveal her true nature, 5 years of careful planning and patient waiting, this moment was finally here. But to understand how we arrived at this courtroom, how the woman I once thought I loved became the calculating predator sitting across from me, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was naive enough to believe that love could conquer greed. 5 years earlier, I was a different man entirely. At 42, I had built a successful consulting firm from nothing, working 16-hour days and sacrificing everything for financial security. But success had come at a cost. I was alone. My marriage to my college sweetheart had ended in an amicable divorce 3 years prior, and since then, dating had felt like navigating a minefield. That's when Victoria entered my life like a hurricane in designer clothes. We met at a charity gala, one of those mandatory social events that successful businessmen attend to maintain their networks. I was nursing a whiskey at the bar, counting the minutes until I could politely escape, when she appeared beside me. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. She was stunning. Not just beautiful, but magnetic in a way that made conversations around us fade into background noise. Raven black hair, emerald eyes, and a smile that suggested she knew secrets worth knowing. "Is it that obvious?" I replied. "Only to someone who feels the same way." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Victoria Summers." Within an hour, we were sharing stories and laughing like old friends. She was charming, intelligent, and showed genuine interest in my work. When she mentioned she was new to the city, having just moved from Chicago after ending a disastrous relationship, I felt an immediate kinship. "Sometimes starting over is the best thing that can happen to you," I told her. "I'm hoping you're right," she replied, and the way she looked at me made my pulse quicken for the first time in years. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Victoria was attentive, affectionate, and eager to be part of my world. She attended my business functions, charmed my colleagues, and made my previously solitary life feel vibrant and full. "You've changed," my business partner Mark observed one evening. "You're happy. It's been a long time since I've seen you like this." He was right. Victoria brought energy and excitement into my carefully structured existence. She encouraged me to travel, to try new restaurants, to live instead of just existing. But there were small things that, in retrospect, should have raised red flags. Her vague explanations about her past, the way she deflected questions about her family or previous relationships, her immediate assumption that we would merge our lives completely. "Why keep separate apartments?" she asked after we'd been dating for 3 months. "We spend every night together anyway." When I hesitated, she tilted her head with that irresistible smile. "Unless you're not as serious about this as I am." The question carried just enough doubt, just enough vulnerability, to make me want to reassure her. Within a week, she had moved into my penthouse. The marriage proposal came from her in a way. We were walking through Central Park on a crisp autumn evening when she stopped suddenly. "Michael," she said, taking my hands, "I know this might sound crazy, but I can't imagine my life without you. These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life." Her eyes shimmered with what looked like tears. "I don't need a big wedding or a long engagement. I just need you." Looking back, I can see the manipulation in those words, the way she framed urgency as romance. But at the time, all I saw was a woman who loved me as much as I loved her. The wedding was planned for 6 weeks later. The prenup conversation happened almost by accident. 2 weeks before our wedding, I was having lunch with my longtime attorney and friend, David Chen. We were discussing updating my will when he casually mentioned asset protection. "You know, with the wedding coming up, you might want to consider a prenuptial agreement," David said, cutting into his salmon. "It's not romantic, but it's practical, especially with your net worth." I nearly choked on my wine. "David, I'm marrying Victoria because I love her, not because I'm worried she'll take my money." "I'm sure you are," he replied calmly, "but love and legal protection aren't mutually exclusive. Think of it as insurance. You hope you'll never need it, but you'll be grateful if you do." I was ready to dismiss the idea entirely when David leaned forward, his expression serious. "Michael, you're my friend, and I've seen too many good men destroyed by bad divorces. A simple prenup protects both of you. If your marriage lasts forever, the document never matters. If it doesn't," he shrugged, "at least you're prepared." That evening, I brought up the subject with Victoria as gently as I could. We were having dinner on the terrace of my penthouse, the city lights twinkling below us. "Victoria, I need to discuss something with you. It's about a prenuptial agreement." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "A what?" "It's just a legal formality," I said quickly. "My attorney thinks it's a good idea, given my business interests. It doesn't mean I don't trust you or love you." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, anger, calculation, I wasn't sure. But then she set down her fork and reached for my hand. "Michael, I understand. You've worked hard for what you have, and you need to protect it. I'm not marrying you for your money." Her acceptance was so immediate, so understanding, that I felt guilty for even bringing it up. "Are you sure? We don't have to—" "No, it makes sense," she interrupted. "I want you to feel secure. What do we need to do?" The agreement was drawn up quickly. It was relatively simple. Assets owned before the marriage remained separate property, as did any inheritances received by either party. Debt incurred individually would remain individual responsibility. In case of divorce, each party would leave with what they brought to the marriage. Victoria signed without reading it thoroughly, waving off my suggestions that she have her own attorney review it. "I trust you," she said, her pen moving across the signature line. "Besides, we're going to be together forever, right?" "Right," I agreed, though David's words echoed in my mind. "You hope you'll never need it, but you'll be grateful if you do." The wedding was beautiful. Victoria looked radiant in her $1,000 dress, and as we exchanged vows, I pushed all doubts aside. This was the woman I loved, the woman who was going to share my life. If only I had known then what that life was actually going to cost me. The transformation began slowly, so gradually that I almost didn't notice it happening. For the first year of marriage, Victoria was everything I had fallen in love with. Attentive, loving, interested in my work and my dreams. We traveled together, entertained together, and I found myself thinking that perhaps I had finally found my perfect match. The change started with small things. Victoria began making expensive purchases without discussion. Designer handbags, jewelry, spa treatments that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "It's not like we can't afford it," she said when I raised the subject gently. "What's the point of having money if we don't enjoy it?" She wasn't wrong, technically. My consulting firm was thriving, and I had always been conservative with my spending. But something about her casual attitude toward money bothered me. Then came the larger expenses. A new BMW because her car was embarrassing. A complete wardrobe overhaul because she needed to look the part of a successful businessman's wife. Jewelry that cost more than some people's houses. "Victoria, we need to establish a budget," I said one evening after discovering she had spent $15,000 in a single shopping trip. Her response was swift and cutting. "A budget? Michael, I'm your wife, not your employee. I'm not going to ask permission every time I want to buy something." The fight that followed was our first real argument. Victoria accused me of being controlling and cheap. She cried, she raged, and finally she gave me the silent treatment for 3 days until I apologized and agreed to increase her monthly allowance. It was a pattern that would repeat many times over the next 3 years. The real turning point came when my Uncle Thomas died unexpectedly, leaving me his entire estate. Uncle Thomas had been a successful real estate investor with no children of his own, and his death left me with an inheritance worth nearly $8 million. Victoria's reaction to the news was illuminating. 8 million. Her eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "Michael, do you realize what this means? We can buy that house in the Hamptons, get the yacht we talked about, travel to Europe for a month." Her immediate focus on spending, rather than on the loss of a family member I had been close to, should have been another red flag. But I was grieving and not thinking clearly. Within weeks of receiving the inheritance, Victoria's behavior changed dramatically. She began talking about our money and our investments as if the inheritance belonged to both of us. She started making plans for expensive renovations to the penthouse, discussing private school options for children we didn't have yet, and dropping hints about upgrading to a larger apartment or buying additional properties. "We should put this money to work," she said one evening, spreading real estate listings across our coffee table. "These properties will appreciate and will make even more money." When I suggested that major financial decisions required both of our agreement, she looked at me as if I had grown a second head. "Michael, we're married. What's yours is mine, remember? For better or worse, richer or poorer." The way she emphasized richer sent a chill down my spine. It was around this time that I began noticing other changes. Victoria became distant, spending more time out with friends I had never met. She was secretive about her phone, taking calls in other rooms and keeping her screen tilted away from me when texting. When I asked about her new social circle, she was evasive. "Just some girls I met at the spa. You wouldn't know them." But something in her tone, combined with the way she suddenly seemed to have inside knowledge about divorce law and asset division, made my instincts prickle with unease. One evening I overheard her on the phone in the bedroom, speaking in hushed tones. "Won't be much longer now. He has no idea. Community property laws. Yes, I know about the prenup, but there are ways around that." My blood turned to ice. I stood in the hallway, straining to hear more, but she lowered her voice even further. When she emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, she was smiling and affectionate, as if the conversation had never happened. That night, for the first time since our wedding, I began to question everything I thought I knew about my wife. The investigation began the next morning. I called David Chen from my office, keeping my voice low and professional despite the turmoil in my chest. "David, I need you to look into something for me, confidentially." "Of course. What's going on?" "I think Victoria might be planning to divorce me, and I think she's been getting legal advice about how to challenge our prenuptial agreement." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Michael," David finally said, "what makes you think that?" I told him about the phone conversation I had overheard, about Victoria's changed behavior, about her sudden obsession with our money and her apparent knowledge of divorce law. "I need to know what I'm dealing with," I concluded. "If she's planning something, I need to be prepared." "I'll make some calls," David said. "Give me 48 hours. Those 48 hours were among the longest of my life. I went through the motions of normal married life, dinner together, watching television, discussing mundane daily events, while internally preparing for battle. Victoria seemed oblivious to my suspicions. She was actually more affectionate than she had been in months, as if sensing that her timeline was accelerating and she needed to keep me comfortable until her plan reached fruition. "I love you," she said one night, curled against me in bed. "You know that, right?" "Of course," I replied, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. David's call came on Thursday afternoon. "Michael, we need to meet. Tonight. My office." The gravity in his voice told me everything I needed to know. That evening, David spread a file across his conference table with the solemnity of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Her name isn't Victoria Summers," he began. "It's Victoria Kelly. She's been married twice before, both times to wealthy men, both marriages ending in expensive divorces." My stomach dropped. "Go on." "Her first husband was a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. Married 18 months, divorced when she claimed half his company's value. Settlement was sealed, but my source says it was substantial." David flipped to another page. "Second husband was a real estate developer in Chicago. Similar pattern, whirlwind romance, quick marriage, expensive divorce. She walked away with nearly $2 million. I felt sick." "Chicago. She said she moved here from Chicago after ending a disastrous relationship." "The relationship was disastrous, for him. She took him for everything she could legally claim." David's expression was grim. "Michael, she's a professional. This is what she does for a living." He showed me more documents, credit reports showing massive debt, evidence of a lawsuit from creditors in Chicago, a pattern of expensive purchases followed by attempts to hide assets. "She's broke," David continued, "has been for months. She's been living on credit, spending money she doesn't have, probably planning all along to use your inheritance to pay off her debts and set herself up for the next score." The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. I had genuinely loved this woman, had opened my life to her, had planned a future together. And all along, she had seen me as nothing more than a mark. "The good news," David said, "is that your prenup is ironclad. She can't touch your inheritance, and if she's been incurring debt in her own name, that's her responsibility. And the bad news? She doesn't know that yet, which means she's probably going to escalate her timeline. If I were her attorney, I'd advise filing for divorce immediately and trying to claim that the inheritance should be considered marital property despite the prenup." David leaned back in his chair. "Michael, I think you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly very quickly." He was right, but what he didn't know, what Victoria didn't know, was that I had learned a thing or two about strategy during my years building a business from nothing. If she wanted to play games, I would make sure I won. The next phase required delicate maneuvering. I couldn't let Victoria know that I had discovered her true identity and intentions. Instead, I had to play the role of the unsuspecting husband while quietly preparing for the inevitable confrontation. "I want to add additional protections to the prenup documentation," I told David. "Make sure every asset is clearly documented, every inheritance detail is specified, every potential loophole is closed." "That's smart," David agreed, "but we need to be careful about how we do this. If she suspects you're preparing for divorce, she might accelerate her timeline." Over the following weeks, I became a careful observer of my own wife. I documented her spending patterns, tracked her mysterious phone calls, and even hired a discreet investigator to follow her during her afternoon spa days. The results were enlightening. Victoria had been meeting regularly with Harold Brennan, one of the city's most aggressive divorce attorneys. The same Harold Brennan who had represented her in her previous divorces, though she had flown him in from Chicago under an assumed name. She had also been meeting with a financial advisor, clearly planning how to maximize her potential settlement. And most damaging of all, she had been researching ways to claim that my inheritance should be considered marital property despite our prenuptial agreement. She's building a case that you promised her the money would be ours, my investigator reported. She's documented several conversations where you supposedly discussed joint investments and shared financial plans. It was clever, I had to admit. Victoria was essentially creating evidence that I had verbally modified our prenuptial agreement, which could potentially invalidate its protections. But I had documentation of my own. Install recording equipment in the house, I told David. I want every conversation documented. If she's going to claim I promised her half my inheritance, I want proof of exactly what was actually said. Michael, are you sure about this? Recording your spouse without consent is legal in New York as long as one party consents, I finished. I've checked, and I consent to recording my own conversations. The recordings revealed Victoria's true nature with stunning clarity. When she thought I couldn't hear her, she spoke about me with contempt and calculation. The old fool actually thinks I love him, she laughed during one phone conversation. He's so desperate for affection that he believes every word I say. Another call. The prenup won't hold up once I show the judge how he promised me everything would be ours. I have witnesses, I have documentation of his verbal promises, and I have evidence of how he's been manipulating our finances to hide assets from me. She was lying, of course, but she was doing it so convincingly that I almost admired her skill. The final piece of evidence came when she thought I was out of town on business. I had actually returned early and was working quietly in my study when I heard her on the phone in the living room. Yes, I'm ready to file, she was saying. He just transferred another $1 million into his personal investment account, clearly trying to hide money from me. I want to file immediately and request an emergency injunction to freeze all assets. How long do you think the case will take? She continued after a pause. 6 months. I can handle 6 months. By then I'll have enough evidence to prove he promised me half of everything, prenup or no prenup. Her laugh was cold and calculating. The best part is, he still thinks I love him. He has no idea what's coming. I sat in my study, listening to the woman I had married plan my financial destruction, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal transformed into something harder, more focused. Victoria wanted to play chess with my life. Fine, but she had made one critical error. She had underestimated her opponent. The divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning while I was supposedly in a business meeting. Victoria had clearly planned the timing carefully. She wanted me to be caught off guard, emotional and unprepared. What she didn't know was that I had been expecting this moment for weeks. I arrived home that evening to find Victoria in the living room, no longer bothering to maintain her loving wife facade. She was sitting in the expensive leather chair I had bought for our first anniversary, her legs crossed, wearing an expression of cold satisfaction. I assume you've seen the papers, she said without preamble. I have. I set my briefcase down calmly. Interesting reading. I think you'll find my attorney has built a very strong case. Harold Brennan doesn't lose divorce cases. The name confirmation was useful, though I already knew about Brennan from my investigation. I'm sure he's very competent, I replied, though I suspect he's working with incomplete information. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? I walked to the bar and poured myself a scotch, taking my time. Well, for instance, I doubt he knows that you're actually Victoria Kelly, not Victoria Summers. Or that you've been married twice before, both times to wealthy men you subsequently divorced. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. I sat down across from her, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. I also doubt he knows that you're currently in debt to the tune of nearly $300,000, or that you've been living on credit cards for the past 8 months. Victoria set down her glass carefully. You had me investigated. I did, very thoroughly. I took a sip of my scotch. Did you really think you could run the same con on me that you pulled on your previous husbands. It's not a con. Please, I interrupted. We're past the point of pretending. You married me for my money, you've been planning this divorce since before you received your inheritance, and you've been working with Harold Brennan to build a case based largely on fabricated evidence. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. The loving wife disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. You can't prove any of that, she said. Actually, I can. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Audio recordings of your phone calls, financial records showing your debt, documentation of your previous marriages and divorces, evidence of your meetings with Brennan under false pretenses. I spread the papers across the coffee table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. But the most damaging evidence, I continued, is the recordings of you admitting that you never loved me, that you married me specifically for my money, and that you've been systematically lying to build your divorce case. Victoria stared at the documents, her carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. The prenup stands, I said quietly. Every asset I brought to this marriage remains mine. The inheritance is mine. The only thing you're entitled to is the debt you've accumulated in your own name. You can't. I can, and I will. I stood up. You have until tomorrow morning to move out. Your personal belongings will be packed and waiting by the door. Everything else stays here, including anything purchased with my money. Victoria jumped to her feet, her composure finally breaking completely. You bastard, I gave you the best years of my life. You gave me lies and manipulation, I replied calmly, and now you're going to discover what happens when you underestimate your mark. The look of pure hatred that crossed her face was worth every moment of the past months of careful planning. This isn't over, she snarled. Yes, it is. The courtroom scene 6 months later was exactly as I had envisioned it. Victoria, her confidence shattered by months of legal setbacks, sat with her expensive attorney who had slowly realized he had been hired under false pretenses to pursue a case with no merit. When Judge Matthews finished reading the prenuptial agreement aloud, the silence that followed was beautiful. Mrs. Harrison, the judge said, did you have your own legal representation when you signed this document? Victoria's voice was barely audible. No, Your Honor, my husband said it was just a formality. But you did sign it willingly. Yes, but... And do you dispute that this is your signature? The pause stretched long enough for everyone in the courtroom to understand that Victoria had no grounds for appeal. No, Your Honor. Judge Matthews looked over his glasses. Then I find this prenuptial agreement to be valid and enforceable. Mrs. Harrison's claims to marital assets and inheritance are denied. The gavel came down with finality. Victoria's attorney gathered his papers with obvious embarrassment. The case that was supposed to make him rich had instead damaged his reputation and cost him more in resources than he would ever recover. As for Victoria, she faced not only the loss of any claim to my assets, but also the crushing debt she had accumulated during our marriage. The credit cards, the loans, the expensive lifestyle she had funded while planning her escape, all of it was now her sole responsibility. The irony was perfect. In her greed to take everything from me, she had destroyed herself. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I established the Harrison Foundation, a legal aid organization that provides resources and support for men facing manipulative partners and predatory divorce proceedings. Victoria's story became a cautionary tale in legal circles. The professional gold digger who finally met her match. As for me, I learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting revenge, it's simply refusing to be a victim. I never saw Victoria again after that day in court, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved to Miami, presumably to find her next wealthy husband. I almost felt sorry for him, whoever he was. Almost.